Alright, here we're going to try to take all that information from the last video and kind of make it, put it in a little more concise fashion. So we want to graph a sine function. I'll graph one cycle from 0 to 2 pi. Again, I mentioned the easiest way to mark off, to use your scale here is to count off 8 units and put your 2 pi, and then go halfway and put pi, and then half of that would be pi over 2. And then halfway between there would be 3 pi over 2. And you can do the same on the negative side. Alright, so what I know is that sine has, we mentioned what the x-intercepts were. We said they were at 0, at pi, and at 2 pi. But it's actually easier saying this. It has zeros or x-intercepts at the beginning, halfway, and at the end of the period. So the beginning of the period is 0, halfway is pi, at the end is 2 pi. Because we're not always going to graph the sine of x, we might graph the sine of 2x or the sine of a half x, and the period is going to change once we stretch and shrink this. That memorizing the x-intercepts is not the way to go. Memorizing where they fall with respect to the to the period is the most important part. So the beginning, halfway, and at the end. We know it has a max. We know it has a max of 1, and that max of 1 it occurs at pi over 2. But that is at a quarter of the period. And so when I shrink or I stretch a sine graph, no matter how long I stretch this or how small I shrink it, the maximum value is going to occur at a quarter of whatever the new period is. The minimum value, which is -1, that occurs at 3/4 of the period. Now, for a basic graph, we said that was at 3 pi over 2, but that's 3/4 of 2 pi. And so we've got -1 right there. We connect with a nice smooth curve. Do as best you can not to make it sharp and pointy. And so I can start again. I can graph another cycle going from -2 pi to 0. At -2 pi is the beginning. At -pi is a half, and at 0, that's the end of the cycle. At a quarter of the way, I have a max of 1. At 3/4 of the way, I have a min of -1. And then I connect them with a nice, smooth curve and do our best to kind of hit the points there. Sorry about that. And I could keep, if I went from 2 pi to 4 pi, I would keep doing this. So what I want you to memorize, what's really important to understand, yes, that the period of a basic function is 2 pi, but that's going to change when we stretch and shrink it. And the max and min of a basic function are 1 and -1. But the zeros occur at the beginning, half, and at the end of the period. The max occurs at a quarter and 3/4 of the period. And so if you weren't sure how to mark, so the reason, again, why we mark off 8, you could mark off 4, because you could get half and half of that very easily. But if I wanted to do the math out and say, well, if I'm not sure what a quarter of 2 pi is, I could say, all right, I know that the max occurs at a quarter of 2 pi, which is 1/4 times 2 pi. Put the 2 pi over 1. That cancels. That becomes a 2. I end up with pi over 2. And if I say 3/4 of 2 pi, then I'm going to take 3/4 and I'm going to multiply it by 2 pi over 1. 2 goes into itself once, goes into here twice. I get 3 pi over 2. So that's another way of getting those values. So in the end, I will be asking you when you're graphing sine and cosine functions, that you label your axes with enough information that I know you understand where the ordered pairs are. So let's do the same thing for a basic cosine function. So I'm going to start by marking off from 0 to 2 pi and from 0 to -2 pi. So I've marked off the 2 pi at my 8 units, and I've marked off pi at 4 units here. And I'm going to start with the zeros. Remember, zeros are x-intercepts. And now for cosine, the zeros or the x-intercepts occur at a quarter of the period and 3/4 of the period. So a quarter of the period would be at pi over 2, which is right here. And then 3/4 of the way would be at 3 pi over 2, which is right here. So those are my zeros, my x-intercepts. Now cosine has a max of 1 that occurs at the beginning, and it also occurs at the end of the period. So beginning is 0, so up 0, 1, and at the end it's at 2 pi. So 0 and 2 pi. It has a min of -1, and that occurs halfway, half of the period. So half of 2 pi is pi, and that's -1. And again, I connect these with a nice smooth curve, doing my best to connect them. I'll do the same thing from -2 pi to 0. The 0 is right here. So cosine mark off my pi over 2 and so -3 pi over 2 is right here, -pi over 2. So I know that cosine has zeros at a quarter of the way, quarter of the period, and 3/4 of the period. It has a max at the beginning, so in this case the beginning is at -2 pi, and at the end, which is at 0, it has a min halfway, so at pi be -1, and then I connect with a nice smooth curve. So it is your job, certainly you need to understand the characteristics as we spoke about them in the last video, where the max and min is -1 and -1 respectively. The period is 2 pi for both. But where these occur with respect to one cycle or over the period is more important. The zeros occur a quarter and 3/4 for cosine. The max is at the beginning and at the end, and the min is halfway. And so we'll use this information to now graph, and you should practice, you should be able to graph one of these, a basic sine and basic cosine function on your own. I would practice that. So in the next video, that's where you're going to get your practice. We're going to start altering, we're going to transform these. We're going to stretch them, we're going to shrink them, change the period, things like that. All these concepts are very similar to concepts that you already know about transformations. We are now just using them for for trigonometric functions.